I'm here today with Mark Leruste, who is on a mission to help entrepreneurs and business leaders impact the world with their story. A transformational leadership coach, founder of Ministry of Purpose, and award-winning host of the Unconventionalists podcast, he previously served as country manager at the Movember Foundation, where he helped raise €2.8 million for men's health. And his new book is called Glow in the Dark: How Sharing Your Personal Story Can Transform Your Business and Change Your Life. Hello, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Alison. Thank you so much. And I've got to say, I'm really impressed that you actually managed to pronounce the Unconventionalist without even slipping. I mean, that's a win for the start of this podcast already.
It's funny, isn't it? You come up with these great names for your podcast, and they seem absolutely brilliant to you. And it's only after 5 episodes in that you realise Extraordinary Business Book Club is too long, and nobody can remember the sequence of the words, or Unconventionalist can't be said by
Yeah.
90% of the population.
Yeah. And you know what the funny thing is? I'm dyslexic. So I don't know how on earth I thought this was a good idea. Like I can barely spell it. Everyone's asking me how to spell it. And just, little anecdote, fun anecdote. When I launched my podcast back in 2015, I had no title for my podcast. So the first episode, if you go back and check it, this is a true story. I think I say, "Welcome to the yet to be named podcast."
That didn't stick, no?
Anyway, yeah, no, that didn't stick at all. Yeah. So then I went the unconventionalist, and then I remember attending, and I'm sure we'll dive into this, a session on like how to find book titles or something like that, like coming up with book titles, and they were giving like some of the like rules, right, or some of the things you should look out for. And one of them was it needs to be easy to remember, it needs to be easy to spell, and you mustn't look silly when you try and say it. I was like, my podcast name is none of those
Fail,
things.
fail, fail. But it is distinctive,
Yeah.
and that is one of the big rules of book titles, isn't it? So you
Yes.
got one there.
Yes.
And I want to come back to
Mhm.
the dyslexia point later on. So mental note, we're going to come back to that
Yeah.
when we talk about writing.
Mm.
But first, I want to talk about Glow in the Dark. So just tell us a little bit about where that idea came from and what you mean by it and why it's important for people to share their stories.
Yeah, it's so it's been a journey, and I know that people listening to this podcast are either on that journey, they've been on that journey, or they're thinking of getting on that journey of writing. So I'm very happy to answer any question you have that you might think that might be helpful for your audience. But um, I've I've got to take you back. I'm going to try my best to do the short version of this. Um, but back in 2019, I used to give talks in companies on a particular topic around like millennials, and I thought about writing a book back then. And I thought, I'm going to write a book to position myself and solidify my position as like the expert for go-to motivation for millennials in the workplace. And then COVID happened and nobody cared about giving talks in millennials and stuff. So I'd already draft like an outline. I'd already gone through a lot of the process of kind of research and almost draft manuscript. I think about maybe 30,000 words, something like that. And I just knew that it wasn't the book I wanted to write anyway. So I started thinking about what book did I really want to do. And like many people listening to this, maybe you've had this, maybe you've got a bunch of authors you've worked with who had this. I had like gazillion ideas. I had a book about X and a book about Y, and I jumped on a call with Hal Clifford. He was the editor behind David Goggins' kind of sensational book, "You Can't Hurt Me" or "You Can't Stop Me." I forgot what it's called. Anyway, and we had this chat, and he basically said, until you figure out what you want to do, you're not going to figure out what book you want to write. And it was this was April 2020, I think it was. And I remember that conversation. It really hit me. And so then I started thinking about what is the book I want to write. And at that time, I thought the book I wanted to write was a book about how to overcome imposter syndrome for entrepreneurs and business leaders. Because, again, you're probably familiar with this, especially in your field. Most people I came across or worked with or spoke to were really good at what they did. Like no doubt about it. They delivered results for their clients. They loved working with the people they work, but they hated putting themselves out there. They hated the idea of having to show up, be it on stage or on social media. And I thought that was such a tragedy. And what I realized is that a lot of that was getting in the way was, at least what I thought at the time, was this concept called imposter syndrome, right? A term that was coined around this idea that we are not as worthy as the world thinks we are. We don't internalize our success. We pass on our accolades like a hot potato by thanking someone else. Actually, it's not me. It's
It was very funny, actually.
fill
I
in the
loved your
blank.
story in the book about turning up to the awards dinner, feeling like an imposter, and then talking to people about it. Every single person there couldn't believe they were on the
Yeah.
list.
But you know what's funny about it? This story happens all the time. So, for example, my partner Julie, she went to Oxford. She did a master's in neuroscience, and she went in there thinking, "This is a fluke, total fluke." Like I don't like there must have been an issue at the admission. And then when she went later on and changed careers and became like a coach, she used to coach students at Oxford, and turns out everyone feels the same way. Like maybe like a small percentage of like very self-centered, narcissistic, overconfident students, but most average, I'd say, people would relate with this idea, right? So that was the idea originally, and I kind of put it out into my network, and on my newsletter, I happened to have an amazing guy called David Over, who used to be the marketing um, manager or something, or director at
Yeah,
Penguin, who
I
I
know
think you know, and
David.
he
Yeah,
spoke very highly of you. And he just replied saying, "Hey, I can help out. I know how the sausage is made."
it's a great
So I
phrase.
started, yeah. So I started hanging out with David, and he was amazing, and he helped me shape a kind of a draft idea. And then again, I've got to plug you in here, Alison. I was having a chat with Lucy Werner, one of your authors, and we were just chatting, and she said, "Oh, you should try Alison Jones, the book proposal kind of challenge, the nonfiction business book proposal challenge that you run." And you're probably going to say the
10-day
right name
business book
correctly, how
proposal
it's said.
challenge. There's another one you see.
A
To me,
10-day.
that's so
There you go.
obvious
I'm
that
dyslexic. No, but
nobody can
there's
get
too
it.
many words. Like if you give me a word more
I
than
know.
2 syllables or a sentence with more than 3 words, I'm out. So I did that with the intention of just getting clarity on what the book was about. And it was amazing. Like, I'm not saying this because I'm talking to you. I just thought it was really great the way that you structured, like, hey, on this day, we're just going to focus on like your bio. On there, we're just going to focus on who your audience is. So it gave me a structure, and someone who's got massive ADD. I needed that kind of intensity, and also the group net, dynamic worked really well for me. But I didn't go in it with the intention of like, or thinking that I would win it, like, because people who don't know this, if they haven't been listening to your show for a while, is that you actually award like a book deal to one person at the end of the week. I'm guessing you
Yes,
still do
absolutely.
this.
There's skin in the
Um,
game.
and so when you said that, and I honestly, again, imposter syndrome, as we were going through this, I was like, there's no way I would, like, it wasn't even on my radar, to the point where when you announced the winners, and it was a winners, I wasn't there because I was on the thing, but I just thought I'll catch up with the call. And I got tagged on Facebook, and I looked on Facebook, and you said the winner, and you put Mark Leruste, and I thought, what? I want a book deal? Like it was so crazy. And then we had a lovely talk, and I told you, I said, look, I just want to potentially shop this book around. And you said, you're like, go, it's great. Like, go and get some advice. We're always here. And I really appreciate that. And I told you this offline the other day. I said, I really appreciated that non-pressure, that kind of like go. And anyway, it's great for
It's
everyone,
absolutely
if you're
brilliant.
going to
It's
go and
like,
get a book
yes,
deal.
we
Yeah.
are winners of our proposal challenge.
Or
The graduates
graduates.
of the proposal challenge,
Exactly.
go to everywhere.
Exactly. The graduate program.
Hachette, Penguin, Pearson,
100%.
Routledge,
Yeah.
Kogan Page, yeah, Bloomsbury.
Exactly it. That's exactly right. And so David Over helped me with shaping the book manuscript. So the reason why I'm saying this long story is I want people to understand that it's a long process. Because it wouldn't give it justice if I gave you like just the short version at the end, because it makes it sound like, oh, that was easy. So we're now going with David through this book proposal, and he's kicking my ass. Oh, my boss. I'm sorry. Apologies for swearing. Um, and uh, and we're going back and forth, and we're trying to make. And I wanted to do it differently, because I did a video CV back in 2011 when no one was doing it, just because I needed to do something to stand out. And so I wanted to create a book proposal, but that was like really beautifully designed, right? Um, so we ended up doing it. I then heard a rumor that you were meant to get a literary agent, to get a book deal. And so I went out again to my network. I said, does anybody know a literary agent? Sophie Devonshire, who is the CEO of the Marketing Society and wrote 2 great books,
Formerly of this podcast
basically
too.
said, "Oh,
Mm.
yeah, well, there you go." And she's awesome. And she said, I haven't worked with her, but I know someone who has." And she introduced me to Kissy, and that's where it started. And then she was like, "Okay, let's shop it around." We shopped it around. We got a few offers, not as many as I thought I would. I thought I was like, she was like, "This could be great. We're gonna get like everybody." I was like, "Yeah, Penguin," and everyone's gonna line up. And it was like, "Yeah, but no. Yeah, but no. Great, but no. Like maybe not now." And eventually we had, I think, 3 offers on the table, and I went with one who actually, funny enough, is very much about the book. He's the only commissioning editor who kicked off our conversation by telling me a story about the publishing house he was working for. Like, he kicked off by saying, this is the story of a publisher that's one of the longest trading in the UK, and we've published Jane Austen. And so he gave me like this story. And so I was emotionally involved, and I felt like he understood the concept of the book better. So I went with him, signed the deal, that stuff. Then the pressure comes, right? Like I got like a stupid short amount of time, like 3 months or 2 months to write the whole manuscript, which I hadn't done at this point. So I start writing. And about halfway through the writing process, I realize that, again, this is not the right book. I love talking about imposter syndrome. I can talk about it, off the cuff from my talks, but it wasn't really the thing I wanted to be known for. It's not the thing I'm really known for. And there was just something else that was calling me. And so I had a bit of an identity crisis about halfway through, and I didn't know what to do. I had two options. Either I don't say anything, I pivot my book, write the book, submit that book at the end and say surprise and
Maybe they
hope for
won't
the
notice.
best. Maybe they won't notice. Or I have a difficult conversation with my publisher, which is what I opted for. And I was very honest. I said, look, I would rather not get a book deal than having to write this book. But if you trust me, I really believe in this other book, which was effectively around, it was still in the same territory. But what I kept on being astonished by, I knew as a podcast host as well, and as an author and people, as a book midwife as well, it's people just don't see how valuable their story is. In fact, I often say, most entrepreneurs and business leaders don't see how powerful their story was. If they did, they wouldn't be sitting on it. And I saw this firsthand with people that interviewed on my podcast, some people that you and I both know, and they just didn't think that story was that great. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I would get messages from people who had heard that podcast saying that inspired me, that changed the way I see X, or I'm now going to do Y. And so I was in this really weird intersection between people sharing the stories, me helping them unpack them sometimes for the first time, like live on it, and being on the receiving end of the impact of that on people. And I kept on thinking, this is nuts. This is like the only thing that's unique about us. It's a method that's been around for, millions of years. And yet we don't leverage it. We're afraid of it. So why? And that's where I got curious about the topic and the research of my book. And look, my publisher trusted me. I went down that road. And what became clear is, I talk about in the book, there's like 10 blockers, right? That which I've identified as to why people don't share their personal story in a professional or business context. But just I think the number one, I was asked recently by Jodie Cook, who writes a column for Forbes. She did a feature on me in my book, and she said, what's the number one thing out of those 10? And I said, I think it's that people just don't see their story as valuable, right? And there's this proximity bias effect, which is when you're so close to something, you just don't see how great it is. You can see that in relationships. You might have been in a relationship sometimes, Alison, in your life where you took it for granted, and maybe you broke up, and once you were away from that relationship, you realized, wow, actually that was a really special person. I was just too close to see it. And it's the same thing with our stories. And I give an example in the book about, can I use you for example,
Yes,
Alison? Is that okay?
absolutely.
Yeah. So what's your favorite book? Well, what's your favorite, actually, no, for the context of this podcast, let's go for the book. What's your favorite
That's
book?
a really tough question for me. I'm going to go with The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, because it's one I just come back to again and again and again.
Okay. How many times have you read The
About
Big
4 or
Leap?
5 times.
Okay, 4 or 5 times. Do you remember how you felt the first time you read it?
Yes, like this chap was putting into words things that I had known but never had words for before.
Love that. Okay. So imagine if I told you, right, now you're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to read this book back to back, not just 5 times, but 100 times. Not just 100 times, like 1,000 times, right? How do you think you would feel after like the 20th time of reading it back to back?
Sorry, Gay Hendricks, but I think even The Big Leap would start to feel like a little bit of too much of a good thing after the sort of 7th time. Yeah.
Right. So you would lose a little bit of interest of it. You might not see just how great it was the first time you met it. It's the exact same thing with our stories. We're so close to them that we've lived them over and over and over and over again that we've just forgotten what it's like for someone who hears it for the first time. And that's kind of what I cover in the book. And I try and land that in the book to say, you're the worst judge for how valuable your story is because you're way too close to it, right? And I've seen this over and over and over again with clients and CEOs and founders and entrepreneurs I've worked with, where they have this thing and they just thought it's completely irrelevant. And I'm like, that is the thing that is going to connect everyone to what you do. And I share this example in the book with Ash. He's a decorated um, army kind of leader. He's done all sorts of things in his life. He's competed for Team GB. He's won a gold record as a choir boy. Just he's been honored by Her late Queen Majesty. On and on, right? And so he sounds a bit superhero-esque. And I remember when I worked with him, when I unpacked his story, I kept on going, there's something missing. There's something that just doesn't click here. And we ended up going and talking back about his childhood. And it turns out that he grew up in a pretty difficult environment and childhood. Like his father had abuse problems and was physically violent. And he often had to put himself in front of his dad and his mum and sister to protect them. And I remember, I even talk about this now, this was years ago. I remember when he said that, I was like, have you ever shared that with anyone? He was like, no, never. And I never will. And I thought that is the glue, the emotional glue that we were missing to your piece, because it makes sense as to why you would run towards fire in an army, in a war situation, right? When literally when a helicopter got shot down and everybody's panicking, he slows down and grabs the women and men he's leading. It's because as a young child, he had to step in. And that's why today he wants to work with companies and help them to, do you see what I'm saying? So, and it took a year. I think it was a year later after we worked together. He sent me a message or an email, I forgot. And he said, it took me a while, but I heard what you said. And I've just shared for the first time my story on this podcast that went on and won like an awards at the British Podcast Award, that podcast. But the point was, and I know this is going to sound a little bit out there to everybody listening to this, who's going like, hey, well, here we go. Another millennial telling us some kind of big, deep moment. But it's healing. And for a long time, I was hiding that element of my book as the Trojan Horse. So I would tell to my friends and close ones, I said, you know what, the Trojan Horse of my book is actually healing. Like this book is going to help you feel confident to share your story in a professional and business context. It's going to help you make a better impact when you introduce yourself. You're going to learn and navigate and be confident, whether you're on a podcast, on a stage, on a panel, blah, blah, blah. It's going to help you grow your business, your profile, your impact, etc. But really, the reason why I wrote this book is it's because it's going to heal pieces of you and parts of you that others around you are going to benefit from. And my friend Emily Gindelsberger, who's the author of Please Help Me Love Me, said to me, stop making that the Trojan Horse, make that the central promise of your book.
It's so fascinating. And there's so many dimensions to that story piece. There's the authenticity, there's the recognition of why you are who you are, there's the connection with other people. There's also, looping right back to the imposter syndrome piece, there's the piece that when you share your story, you kind of enable other people to share theirs. And unless we are talking
Yes.
honestly, nobody realizes that everybody feels the same and everybody's feeling the fear and like they shouldn't be there and all that stuff.
Yes.
So many things I want to touch about. I'm trying to pick up. Right. What I would love to pick up on is, I guess, a counter argument or something that I'd like to, because although there are
Please.
many people who don't share their story and don't see the value in it and all the rest of it, there are other people, particularly in the book writing world, who, I get this quite often. People come to me and say, oh, I'd like to tell my story. And my heart sort of sinks a little bit because actually, unless you're a celebrity, nobody really gives a toss about your story. They only care about it if it helps them understand their story better. And so because we know we're talking to an audience of people who, many of whom aspire to write a business book, how do you know? And I want that thing about the impact story, I think is probably the best thing to draw out here. How do you know when it's right to share your story or where it's just self-indulgent waffle?
I love that question so much. Let me unpack that the best as I can. So I'm going to give a counter argument to that. And I'm going to say everyone should write their story regardless if they publish it or not. Period. I don't care whether you put it up on Amazon or get to work with Practical Inspiration Publishing, which you should. But I think number one is the process is there's actually a very cathartic experience of writing your story. And I actually, one of my, I say at the end of the book, spoiler alert, that like one of my secret wishes with this book is that it starts a revolution of people owning their stories and sharing their stories so we can capture the stories of our elders and that our kids and nieces and pets and plants get to hear our stories. So I'm going to separate the two between I'm writing a book because I want to make a bestseller. I want this to help me grow my business. I'm going to tell my story with I feel I have a story inside of me that I want to tell. And And actually, Gabor Mate, right, who's the author of the book that just came out called The Myth of Normal, spent a lot of his time as a palliatic doctor and pediatrician. I forgot what the term is in Canada, but anyway, as a doctor, and he talked about what he learned from the dying, and he talks about like all these different things that we know about. I wish I was. I wish I said I love you more. I wish I spent more time with my kids. I wish I hadn't lived other people's expectations. The classic stuff. But the one that I wrote, and actually, again, double spoiler alert. This is coming out on my book launch event that I'm doing. I've got it on a slide. It's what most people said is, I want to tell my story. I want my story to be heard. And that moves, it really
I
moves
want
me
to be
because I'm
seen.
thinking, imagine yeah, because you want to be seen, heard, and understood. Deep down, I think we all crave that. We can say that we don't. But I think that's ultimately a lot of one of our human drive is we want to be seen, heard, and understood. And so the process, it's funny because when I wanted to write my book, my partner, Juice, had the exact same reaction. It's like, you're going to write because one day I'd love to write, and I put air quotes, people listen to this, a memoir or, and she's like, who the hell do you think you are? Like, you're not a celebrity, you're not a politician. But I said, it's not for anybody else apart from my kids and hopefully maybe my children's children. It's that I wish I had that about my grandparents. I really, really do. Like, I forgot memories of sitting as a kid around the table and my grandmother, my French grandmother, my French granddad talking about the war because I'm the great grandchild of André Pierre Larenaudy, Pierre Larenaudy, who was like a war veteran in Corrèze who won the Legion of Honor from Charles de Gaulle. He was like this really great resistant leader. And he went into concentration camps in Germany, and my grandmother was tortured, and my granddad went to war, ended up in working camps. So these were the narratives around the dinner table, and I was fascinated from a young age. And what I wouldn't give to hold in my hand a book that my grandmother wrote or that my granddad wrote or my great granddad wrote, and I could learn about them because I think when we learn about those around us, we learn a bit more about ourselves. You know,
But I am going to pull you back to the business book
yeah.
application and
Yes.
the
Okay. Sorry. Thank
impact
you.
of
So
story.
just yes. So thank you very much. So just I wanted to say that so that people listen to say I might just want to write a book for the sake of writing it. Then what I do with it is a different story. And actually, in my book, I talk about an example called Jevon McCormick. He is the CEO and president of Scribe Media, and he wrote a book just for his kids. I think he's got 4 kids or 3 kids. I forgot now. 4 kids, I think. He just wrote his because he's the son of a drug dealing pimp who fathered like 20 or 30 kids, and his mum was an orphan who raised him on food stamp. So he's got no history beyond his mum, right? So he wrote this book just purely for his kids. And then what happened is someone read his book and was like, you need to put this out there. And he's like, no, it's just, I don't see how it's relevant. And it just completely blew up his profile. He started giving talks, and his book's amazing. It's one of my favorite stories, and that's why it's in the book. So now to come back to your story. So the intention is what you're asking is you've got to clarify what your intention is. So is your intention to say, I feel I've lived through something that could be helpful to others, and I want to distill my story into a message of hope or a message of a method so that they can too heal, recover, get over, fix, whatever it is. So if that's the case, then great. Just get really clear on what your final outcome is. And I talk about this in the book. You reverse engineer your story. So I'll give you an example in a business context, right? Um, let's say you're someone who's, I don't know, who's discovered the power of gut health. I'm just coming up with some random topic here, Alison, so bear with me. But you're someone who's like, I used to have terrible IBS issues. I couldn't go out. The idea of going to the cinema with my partner was just like horrendous. Fill in the blank. I used to travel around with toilet paper, and then I discovered X, and it really helped me. And I felt so alone when I was going through these moments, and it felt like nobody else was going through this. And I just wish there was a book that would have told me, "Hey, A, you're not alone, and B, there's a way out." And I want to write that book. So when you come from that place, I can go, yeah, that makes sense. But it's a story about you, but it's not
Right.
for you, right? So
That's the
it's like
distinction.
you're basically, yeah, your story is a vehicle for a bigger message that you're trying to
Yeah.
convey or land. That's the difference, I think, between actually, I don't know if you remember the three golden rules of impact driven stories from the book. Like there are three parts. I'll just remind you really quickly. Um, so the three parts are: you've got to give context, you've got to give connection, and you've got to give a conclusion. So it's like tell me, teach me, no, tell me, take me, teach me. That's it. So the reason why I came up with this really simple formula was um, storytelling can be what's the opposite of simplified?
Overcomplicated.
Complexified? Overcomplicated. Thank you. So,
Complexified
complexified.
is a great
Anyway,
word, though. We
overcomplicated.
should probably use that
It's a
one.
great word. We should totally use that. That's a great book title for a next author of yours.
Complexified.
Um,
Makes
so
note.
it was just like yeah, it's like seven different steps, 12 steps. And I just thought that's for me, my brain's just three steps, three really simple steps. So I'll walk you through them. So step number one is about context, and that's about give us the scene. What is the minimum information we need to know about your story so that we don't wonder, wait, where's this? When was this? Just like really simple. Okay, so you take us into the scene. You give us the context. The number two is connection. This is where you take us into the story, the emotional kind of arc of your story. What did you go through? What did you overcome? What did you, all this kind of stuff. Where most people go wrong is that they stop there. When you stop there, your story becomes more like about you, and there's not a lot in it for anybody else listening. So that's why the third step is really important, and that's conclusion, right? What is it that you want to teach us? What is it that you want to share with us? That's it. So what? Exactly. So that's exactly right. So, in my story, let's take the imposter syndrome story that you said. So imagine if I said, I was like, it's 2006. I forgot what, I'm going to make it up. I forgot what year it is. It's 2016. I'm walking into this hall. I'm hearing the music and I'm seeing all these people around and I'm thinking, the only thing I'm thinking to myself is, what the hell am I doing here? I've somehow been, shortlisted and selected as one of the 50 most inspiring people in London. And I'm 100% sure this is a mistake and some fraud police is going to knock through the door and take me out. Right. So I've taken you. Now, if I stopped it there, it would be like a nice anecdote between you and I over a drink or nibbles or something, right? But in a business context, or if you're trying to raise your profile, make an impact, all this kind of stuff, grow your influence, you've got to take it a step further. So what I would say is, what I was feeling was what is often commonly referred as imposter syndrome. And when I thought I was alone, I started speaking to people around me, and they kept on saying, "I have no idea what I'm doing here." And I said, "Me too." And before you know it, I realized that every single person in that room felt exactly like I did. And what I learned that day, and this is kind of where you drop the conclusion, what I learned that day is we can sometimes feel like we're the only people going through something. And that shame of going through that experience is what keeps us in silence and in the dark. But actually, the moment you shine a light on it and show someone else is the moment you realize you're not alone. Find the people who are going through the same thing so that you can also connect and feel like there's hope. So I just made this up on the spot, but can you see how I just used that three-step formula and I applied it to a random story? And I think that's, to answer a really long answer to your question, is that's how you separate a please like me, love me, and give me a sympathy versus I'm going to share your story, but it's not about me, it's for you. And here's why. And I'm going to finish with that kind of message.
And what I love about that, and the whole book as well, is that is that the Trojan Horse thing, isn't it? It's the when you do this for yourself, it is incredibly powerful for you, and then when you share it with other people, it's incredibly powerful for them. And boom, yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, and you picked it up really nicely. I talk about there's a different energy about someone who owns their story. And I actually use the example of Eminem in 8 Mile, the film, for those who B
When he
Rabbit,
disarms his
for those
opponent.
who yeah. So if even if you're not into hip hop, if you're not into Eminem and you find him, whatever, just that scene's amazing. If you don't mind, I'll just say it really quickly. It's a rap battle, and the concept of a rap battle is you're meant to diss. Diss is you're supposed to kind of break down your opponent by making fun of them, making everybody laugh, and they're just too embarrassed to come back. Disrespect them. That's right. Right. Diss. Thank you. And so the usual method is like you're going to start off by taking all your attention and focus on the other person and trying to dismantle them to your best abilities and hope that you break them bad enough that they can't come back. That's kind of like in a really nutshell, right? But it's the final scene. Spoiler alert: if you want to watch 8 Mile, pause this or accelerate this for the next few seconds. And he goes, he gets the mic, and you see this moment of hesitation, and he's bopping back and forth, and there's kind of like there's music in the background. Everybody's kind of waving their hands, and he kicks off, and he basically lists all the things about him which would be shameful, embarrassing, And literally at the end, he says, I forgot what the final line, and everybody who's watched the film, whose fans are going to hate me for this. I'm going to get so much hate mail for this. But he says something like, I am a bum. I do live with my mum and a trailer trunk, no. And then he says, now go ahead, tell them something they don't know about me. And he drops the mic. And everybody, like even now, I can feel everybody there's this huge energy, and he just is speechless. Because when you remove the weapon that you fear most by owning your story and sharing it, you experience ultimate freedom, which is you no longer fear what other people hold on you or know about you or don't know about you. It's like, Alison, it's like it. Look, I still have stuff right which I'm working through. We talk about this in the book about open wounds, but there is a different energy about someone who rocks up and just owns it. Like the fact that I can tell you, I think we talked about this in the podcast at the beginning, that I'm dyslexic. I couldn't say that before, and I think I talk about this in the book. I
You
can't
do. There's
remember.
that lovely moment when you
There was
talk about being a kid and just grappling with these books and hating it. And then if you could go
yeah,
back and tell yourself, not only
yeah,
will you come
yeah,
through
yeah,
this,
yeah,
but you will be published under the
yeah,
same imprint of these books that you're hating. I mean,
yeah,
it's just beautiful.
yeah. It is crazy. Like, um, by the time this comes out, I reckon the video will be out. So I think it's okay for me to talk about it. So, uh, I had a videographer come with me to shoot a day where I did the audio book, and I went to see my publisher, and they surprised me with a copy of my book. And they literally just gave me the book in my hands, and so you've got this on video. You can watch it. I can send you the link if you want to link it in the show notes. But and I'm going through this book, and I'm kind of explaining the story, like that story, but I'm kind of sharing it. And Alison, out of nowhere, this emotional wave
Yeah.
hits me. And in my experience, I'm like this, snots and all,
Ugly
crying, my
crying.
bawling my eyes out. Actually, when you look at the video, I'm just kind of like tearing up a bit. But it's that full circle of the books that used to traumatize me with that logo of Hachette. My healing book, I hope, now bears the same emblem. But this time it's a book for good. And look, education books are really important, so I don't want to hate on them, but it felt crazy. It felt 100% crazy when I realized that, like, never in a million years could that 6-year-old self who was bullied on a daily basis by school teachers, who felt inadequate and would have felt, oh my God, I'm going to get a book that's going to be out there and help people. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Brilliant. I'm going to tear it myself in a minute. I want to ask you for your one best tip, Mark. I'm conscious of time because there's so much else I want to ask you, but it would be
Mm.
remiss of me not to give you that kind of, one thing, just one thing that people can take away if they didn't know that's going to change things for them.
Yeah, that your story matters. No matter what your voice inside your head tells you right now, whether that's no one cares, your story's not that exciting. And the scariest one is if people knew who you really were, there's no way they'd love you, right? Like all those voices inside your head, and I talk about the 10 blockers in the book. There's a bunch of them, but their purpose is in a way to protect you. Like you've got to acknowledge that voice by going, hey, you don't differentiate between the 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old self and the 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever year old self, right? Um, just know that. Just know that you may not be the best judge of how valuable your story is. And I'll be cheeky and add a second tail to that, which is your story is about you, but it's not for you. Like someone somewhere woke up this morning needing to hear your story to not feel alone. And your story has a trajectory of changing someone's life. Like, I kid you not, the number of times I heard people saying how X story helped them come over, Y challenges. You would be amazed at what comes back to you when you start having the courage to share your personal story in a public context. And I also want to say, do it in a way that feels
Mm.
safe. Like really important, right? I talk about this in the book, and I learned about this the hard way. There are certain, and I call it like the super, I think it's called the supercharger story formula, something like that. It's understanding that the platform, the audience, the message, and context in which you share your story
Mm.
matters. There's certain stories are best reserved for your therapist. Some stories are best reserved for your investors. Some stories are best reserved for your team, and some for the
Mm.
public. So I'm not asking you to go and spill your guts on social media right now about your deepest wounds, right? Whether it's a little T trauma or a big T trauma. What I'm saying is, please take the invitation and the call that I'm asking you to explore. What would it be like if you owned your
Yeah.
story? What would it be like if you shared your story? That'd
I'm
be
going
my
to put a
call.
personal plug for exploratory writing as a lovely safe space in which to explore that as well. Yeah, brilliant.
Yes. Yes, at 100%. I think it's a great
Yeah,
companion book. I really do. I actually say to everyone, again, people are going through this. I talk about the 4 different types of stories, the open wounds, the broken record, all this stuff. Writing is a beautiful practice to come to terms with some of the things you grapple with. And I talk about Dax Shepard a lot in the book, who's the host of the Expert Armchair podcast, and he's in AA's, which is the Alcoholics Anonymous program with 12 steps, and he talks about the number of times you hear people share stories that you should hate them for, you should want nothing to do with them, but the moment you kind of own it as a fault and as I'm not perfect, but I'm doing my best, is the moment you create connection. So yeah,
brilliant.
I could go on for this for about hours,
I know,
obviously, but
and we're so over time, and I don't even care. tell, tell us the book that you would recommend. You're not allowed to recommend Glow in the Dark, sorry, but what
yeah,
book would you recommend that
yeah.
people listening should read if they haven't already?
Oh my
I know it's such an
days.
unfair question,
Oh
isn't
my
it?
days. Oh my god.
If
Okay,
we're
let me
watching this
just
on video, Mark is basically just scanning his bookshelf at the moment.
yeah. Yeah. So okay. So oh my god. So for me it's like, oh my, it depends. It's like it's context dependent. Now they said it depends what you're looking for. A book that they have, is this nonfiction business
Any
or
book.
just any book? Any book. Oh, okay. I'm gonna go with the first book that comes to mind for whatever reason, and it's when breath becomes air. I don't know why that book comes up, but it came up.
That's written by the palliative care surgeon, isn't it? Who's talking about
Yeah.
not surgeon, palliative care
Yeah. So
consultant who's talking about end of life care.
yeah, yes.
I can't remember his name.
And it, I don't know why that book came up, because I've got like a gazillion book I'd talk about and recommend, but that book is so beautifully written, and I don't think it's a coincidence I'd said that book. As I think about it, it's kind of a man's journey to capture a story before the end. And I just heads up, get
Got it.
tissues. I'm just
And
going to say that, but
it doesn't have to be directly relevant to you. I think when you hear of a really well-written nonfiction book, it's so worth your time to read it, because the patterns and the rhythms of really good writing stay with you, and they make you a better writer. So for that reason alone, yeah.
Yeah.
And Mark, if people want to find out more about you, more about the Unconventionalists, just saying it again to show off, where should they go?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think the best place to go at the moment is www.glowinthedarkbook.com. There you can find everything you need, whether that's interviewing on a podcast or featuring me, whatever it is, buy the book. Anything you need is probably going to be there. And then I direct back to my websites like markleruste.com and all this stuff, podcast. But that would be the best place to start.
That's where you go. Brilliant. And hopefully we'll have a link to that video that you're talking about, so people can see you bawling.
Yes, you will, because it's ready now. I'm about to publish it, so you'll 100% get the link. And I'm not more like, I just want to say, in my mind, again, that whole thing about perception versus reality. In my mind, I am like snot, tears, uncontrollably crying. When you look at the videos, you'll be like, really, Mark? Doesn't look like you're crying. But anyway, yeah, I'll share that.
Wonderful.
For sure.
And everything will be, the transcript as well will be up on the show notes at extraordinarybusinessbooks.com. So thank you for your time today, Mark. It was just brilliant hearing the story behind the book and the story behind you. Thank you.
Thank you, Edison, for being part of the journey and making this a reality. Thank you.